14 black actors who went broke instantly. One of them earned $230 million in the ring, then had to auction off his own Olympic medals to pay the bills. One topped the Billboard charts for years, then couldn't afford a fast food meal for his own kids. One was the biggest child star on the planet, and discovered as an adult that his millions had already been drained away, from stolen trust funds to staggering tax debts, from predatory contracts to a single sentence that erased $1 billion overnight. These 14 black icons prove that a fortune can vanish faster than it was ever made. Stay to the end, because the last story will break your heart. And subscribe to Secret Celebrity Stories, where every fortune tells a lesson. Marvin Gaye. The life of Marvin Gaye was a symphony of profound artistic brilliance, woven together with the deepest financial despair. As the Prince of Motown, he redefined soul music forever, with masterpieces like What's Going On and Let's Get It On. And yet, while his voice moved millions of hearts around the world, his own bank account remained a constant, private battlefield. By the late 1970s, Gaye was quietly drowning in debt, owing enormous sums to the IRS, while battling a cocaine addiction that reportedly cost him upward of $1,000 every single week. The very man who wrote the soundtrack for Love was trapped, behind closed doors, inside a financial nightmare that finally forced him into bankruptcy in 1976. And the most painful chapter of all came with his 1977 divorce from Anna Gordy, when a judge ordered him to pay her a portion of the royalties from his very next album. His response was extraordinary and heartbreaking. He created Here, My Dear, a raw and confessional double album about the collapse of his own marriage. Imagine being so financially depleted that your own private heartbreak had to be turned into a product, simply to settle a debt. Owing more than $2 million in back taxes, Gaye eventually fled into a self-imposed exile in Europe, just to escape the reach of the IRS. And even the enormous 1982 comeback of Sexual Healing could not fully rebuild the foundation beneath him. When he finally returned home, his old debts came following right after him. He died in 1984, at just 43 years old, shot by his own father during a domestic dispute, still technically insolvent, his estate tangled in tax liens. Marvin Gaye's story is a haunting lesson for us all. Even the most divine talent imaginable can be quietly undone by personal demons and a total absence of financial protection. He didn't merely sing the blues, he lived them, all the way to the very end. Kanye West. Kanye West, now legally known simply as Ye, is not the typical story of a slowly fading star, but rather the story of a high-stakes visionary who repeatedly chose to bet everything he owned on himself. Back in 2016, he stunned the entire world by announcing on Twitter that he was fully $53 million in personal debt, having poured his own capital into his Yeezy fashion dream, while much of the industry openly ridiculed him for it. But that mockery did not last for very long. His landmark partnership with Adidas went on to transform the entire sneaker industry, and by 2021, it had propelled his net worth as high as $1.8 to $2 billion by mainstream estimates, with some reports climbing far higher still. He had proven, decisively, that his so-called debt had really been a massive investment in his own future. And then, in October of 2022, came one of the fastest wealth collapses in all of celebrity history. After Kanye made a series of anti-Semitic remarks that were widely and roundly condemned, Adidas, Gap, and Balenciaga each severed their ties with him, and Forbes stripped him of his billionaire status virtually overnight. The Adidas deal alone had reportedly accounted for an estimated $1.5 billion of his total value. As of 2026, mainstream financial outlets estimate his net worth somewhere between roughly $350 and $400 million, though Kanye himself sharply disputes that figure, pointing instead to a private valuation of his wholly owned Yeezy trademark. He remains a titan of the culture, with more than 160 million records sold and 24 Grammy Awards to his name, but his fortune now rests upon far shakier ground than it once did. His story is a stark and sobering reminder that even colossal wealth can be surprisingly fragile when it is tied so tightly to public perception. and to corporate goodwill, and that in the world of high-stakes business, the distance between a celebrated genius and a cautionary tale can be as thin as a single sentence spoken out loud. Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill stands today as a genuine goddess of hip-hop and neo-soul, and yet her financial journey is the somber tale of a living legend who tried, and mostly failed, to withdraw from a system that simply would not let her go. After the seismic, culture-shifting success of The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which won 5 Grammy Awards and became one of the best-selling albums in history, she largely retreated from the spotlight altogether, seeking a quieter, more private life, away from what she once called the soul-crushing machinery of the music industry. But stepping back from the stage did nothing to stop her past obligations from quietly mounting behind her. In 2012, she was formally charged with failing to file tax returns on roughly $1.8 million of income, and in 2013, she served 3 months in federal prison, ultimately paying back nearly $1 million in overdue taxes and penalties. Hill has always argued that her failure to pay stemmed from a genuine personal crisis, and from her rejection of an industry she felt had only ever treated her as a cash cow rather than as a human being. And the financial echoes of it all still follow her to this day. In early 2026, records from the New Jersey Division of Taxation revealed 2 active state tax liens against her, one for about $133,000 and another for roughly $759,000, which her representatives say she is now resolving through an established repayment plan, tied to income that was disrupted when a major tour of hers was suddenly canceled. Despite her towering artistic status, she has spent much of the last decade performing only sporadically, in large part just to manage these lingering liabilities. Her story is a powerful testament to one very hard truth. You cannot simply choose to opt out of the system without first building a fortress of financial protection around yourself and everything you have earned. 50 Cent. Curtis Jackson, known to the world as 50 Cent, is the absolute master of the comeback, and his 2015 financial crisis remains one of the single most misunderstood chapters in modern celebrity history. Back in the mid-2000s, he wasn't merely a rapper at all. He was a full-blown corporate juggernaut. His debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', sold roughly 12 million copies, and his remarkably visionary early investment in vitamin water reportedly netted him a staggering sum, one often cited at around $100 million before taxes, when the company was eventually sold to Coca-Cola. Forbes once estimated his personal net worth as high as $155 million. So the entire world was stunned when he suddenly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, declaring debts of $32 million. The mockery that followed was relentless, with a great many people simply assuming the G-Unit leader had recklessly blown his whole fortune on mansions and fast cars. But his filing was, in truth, a cold and calculated chess move. He was facing more than $24 million in mounting legal judgments, including a $17.2 million loss to a headphone company and a separate $7 million lawsuit. By filing for Chapter 11, he did not surrender at all. Instead, he strategically froze the entire collection process, restructured his payments on his own terms, and shielded his core business assets from ever being seized. It was a disciplined corporate maneuver that most artists would simply never have the nerve to attempt. Today, 50 Cent has fully emerged from that bankruptcy and is arguably more powerful now than ever before, with an estimated net worth of $40 to $50 million and a sprawling television empire built on the Power franchise. He proved that broke can be a temporary status on a piece of paper, while poor is a permanent poverty of vision, and he was simply willing to look broke in order to truly win. Isaac Hayes. Isaac Hayes was so much more than merely a musician. He was a genuine cultural architect, a man who fundamentally redefined the very sound of black masculinity throughout the 1970s. At the towering height of his Black Moses era, he was the undisputed crown jewel of Stax Records, and his unforgettable soundtrack for the film Shaft didn't just win him an Academy Award for Best Original Song. It became a global gold standard for soul music itself. He lived a life of genuinely extravagant luxury, famous the world over for his gold-plated Cadillac and his sprawling estate. But beneath all of the gold chains and the glamour, the foundation was quietly crumbling away. In 1976, at the absolute pinnacle of his creative powers, Hayes was forced to file for bankruptcy, drowning under more than $6 million of debt, a truly astronomical figure for that era. It was a perfect storm of terrible timing and predatory industry practice all at once. Stax Records, the very label he had helped to build with his own hands, was collapsing into its own financial ruin, and it simply could not pay him the millions of dollars it owed him in earned royalties. And because Hayes had borrowed so heavily against his own future earnings to fund that lavish lifestyle, the very moment those royalty checks stopped arriving, the creditors immediately moved in. In a devastating final blow, the bankruptcy court forced him to sell off the rights to his own music catalog, the very soul of his entire life's work, leaving him with virtually no residual income from his own greatest hits. He rebuilt himself slowly, from almost nothing, eventually finding a whole new generation of fans, as the voice of Chef on South Park before his death in 2008, at the age of 65. His story is a haunting reminder that trophies mean little if you don't own the paper they're printed on. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes remains a symbol of pure, coiled cinematic intensity, and yet his entire legacy is now forever tethered to a financial collapse that genuinely shocked the world. Throughout the late 1990s and the early 2000s, he was the undisputed king of action cinema, commanding the global box office with the Blade trilogy, Demolition Man, and Passenger 57, and earning a reported $10 to $15 million for every single film. He had amassed a fortune that, by all rights, should have secured his entire family for several generations to come. But the very man who hunted vampires so effortlessly on screen proved utterly helpless against the IRS. Between the years of 1999 and 2001, despite earning nearly $40 million in gross income, Snipes somehow failed to file even a single federal tax return. His downfall was never simple neglect. It was instead a catastrophic lapse in judgment, as he was reportedly led badly astray by advisors who pushed dangerous anti-tax ideologies, gradually convincing him that the government held no legal right whatsoever to his hard-earned money. In 2006, the federal government formally charged him with willfully failing to file those returns, and in 2008, he was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. From 2010 to 2013, the Blade star quietly served out his time inside a federal correctional institution. And that 3-year absence didn't merely drain his accounts. It completely evaporated his career momentum during the exact peak of the superhero movie boom, a genre his own Blade films had genuinely helped to invent in the first place. Millions more disappeared into legal fees, forcing him to liquidate assets. While he has since made a dignified return in projects like Coming to America, Snipes stands as Hollywood's ultimate tax cautionary tale. He proved that no matter how high you can fly on screen, you can never truly outrun the tax man, and that trusting the wrong voices can cost a man his freedom. MC Hammer. Stanley Burrell, known all across the globe as MC Hammer, is perhaps the single most frequently cited name in the entire genre of financial cautionary tales. Back in 1990, he wasn't merely a successful rapper, he was a genuine global phenomenon. His diamond-certified album Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em spent an absolutely astonishing 21 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200, and he was pulling in an estimated $33 million every year, with his peak personal wealth eventually reaching somewhere around $70 million. He brilliantly blended hip-hop with mainstream pop appeal and locked down enormous endorsement deals with both Pepsi and Mattel. But the sheer velocity of his spending soon outran even his own legendary footwork. Hammer's downfall was rooted, touchingly, in an almost communal kind of generosity. He famously kept an entourage of more than 200 people on his personal payroll, reportedly spending close to $500,000 every single month, just to keep his whole inner circle gainfully employed. His mansion in Fremont, California, slowly became the very centerpiece of his debt. A $30 million estate, boasting a 17-car garage, 2 swimming pools, and marble floors etched with his own initials. And then, when the musical tide shifted in the mid-90s toward far grittier gangsta rap, Hammer's flamboyant, joyful pop style abruptly lost its grip on the public. By 1996, the very man who sang, "You Can't Touch This," was touched by the cold, hard reality of insolvency, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $13.7 million in debt. That $30 million mansion eventually sold for a mere fraction of its cost. Critics mocked him mercilessly for it all, but Hammer's resilience ultimately outshone every bit of the ridicule. He pivoted skillfully into tech investing and Silicon Valley advisory roles, proving that while you can lose $70 million in a single heartbeat, the hustle that first earned it can be truly indestructible. Evander Holyfield. Evander, the real deal Holyfield, is, without question, one of the greatest boxers in the entire history of the sport, and his financial loss is very nearly as staggering as his monumental achievements inside the ring. Across a truly legendary career that included 4 separate heavyweight championships and the infamous bite fight against Mike Tyson, Holyfield earned a massive $230 million. He was a global sporting icon who, by any reasonable measure, should have been comfortably set for life several times over. And yet, in 2008, the entire world watched in genuine disbelief as his 109-room, 54,000-square-foot Georgia mansion slid into foreclosure, ultimately forcing him to auction off his championship rings, his robes, and even his cherished Olympic medals, all just to service his relentlessly mounting debts. The real deal was finally undone by a brutal combination of crushing overhead and endless obligation. His estate, known as Villa Holyfield, was a genuine financial black hole, reportedly requiring well over $1 million every year just to cover the property taxes and the electricity bills alone. And with 11 children by 6 different women, his monthly child support obligations were estimated at well over $100,000. Then, like so very many athletes before and after him, he was quietly victimized by poor financial advice, losing many millions in a string of bad ventures and trusting the wrong people, who treated his enormous fortune like an open tap that could never possibly run dry. By the time he finally retired, the very man who had traded blows with living legends was being slowly knocked out by the simple, merciless arithmetic of his own expenses. Today, his net worth is estimated at only a small fraction of its former glory. His story is a powerful reminder that big money never lasts long without equally big management, and that the biggest opponent any of us ever face isn't in the ring, but in the life we build around it. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton remains, to this very day, the undisputed First Lady of R&B, and yet she is also one of the most prominent examples imaginable of how a truly legendary voice can be silenced by nothing more than a bad contract and a cruel twist of health. With more than 70 million records sold and 7 Grammy Awards to her name, Braxton has nonetheless been forced to file for bankruptcy not once, but twice. First in 1998, and then again in 2010. Her very first financial collapse arrived at the absolute height of her success, and it exposes the music industry's quiet cruelty better than almost any other story on this entire list. Despite having a record that generated well over $170 million in total sales, she was reportedly receiving royalty checks as small as just a couple of $1,000s. She had been quietly trapped inside a predatory recording contract, one that forced her to personally repay every single advance that had been spent building up her own lavish public image, leaving her owing millions to her own label, while her beloved hits played on every radio station in the country. She fought back with everything she had and slowly recovered. But her second bankruptcy in 2010 proved even more devastating, because this time, it was never only about the industry. This time, it was her own body. Diagnosed with lupus, a serious chronic autoimmune disease, Braxton suddenly faced a cascade of canceled shows and enormous, unending medical bills, with the debts in that second filing estimated somewhere between $10 and $50 million. Cruel critics called her fiscally irresponsible, while conveniently ignoring the reality of a woman quietly fighting for her very life, just as her primary income, touring, became physically impossible for her. Today, Toni Braxton stands as a genuine symbol of survival, having rebuilt her entire brand and returned to the stage with a hard-won focus on true financial independence. Lil Kim. Kimberly Jones, known to the world as Lil Kim, is quite simply the blueprint for the entire modern female rapper. And yet her long financial journey has been a harrowing, years-long struggle just to hold on to her hard-won throne. All throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s, first as a member of Junior Mafia, and then as a solo powerhouse in her own right, she moved millions upon millions of units, with albums like Hardcore and the notorious K.I.M. She was a genuine, undeniable fashion icon, sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week and signing major endorsement deals left and right. But beneath all of the furs and the designer labels, a serious financial crisis was very quietly mounting. In 2018, the whole world was stunned when the Queen Bee filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, revealing that she was more than $4 million in debt, with her New Jersey mansion already sliding into foreclosure. The primary architect of her downfall was a staggering $1.8 million tax debt owed directly to the IRS. Like so many other pioneers who happened to hit it big at a very young age, Kim had simply lacked the institutional support she needed to properly manage sudden, overwhelming wealth. The mockery aimed at her was brutal, with online trolls cruelly suggesting she'd spent it all on plastic surgery. But the truth of it was always far more complex. Her career had been badly hampered by a 1-year prison sentence back in 2005 for perjury, which stopped her income cold, while her legal fees and her tax interest just kept compounding, aggressively, in the background. By the time she finally filed, her assets were valued at a mere $82,000. Today she remains a tireless performer, touring and releasing music to satisfy her restructured debts, proving that her true influence on the culture is a currency that can simply never be liquidated. T-Pain. Fahim Najm, known everywhere as T-Pain, is a genuine pioneer of the auto-tune sound that completely reshaped the entire 2000s. But his personal journey also includes a financial rock bottom so low that most other stars would never once dare to admit it out loud. At the very peak of his powers, he was the single most sought-after featured artist in the entire world, quietly amassing a fortune of roughly $40 million, as the unmistakable voice behind club anthem after club anthem, from Buy You a Drank all the way to Bartender. And yet, by the year 2013, the very man who once sang so joyfully about buying the whole bar a round of drinks suddenly couldn't even afford to buy his own children a simple fast food meal. He has since spoken with genuinely rare honesty about having to borrow money just to feed his own family, a truly stunning admission from someone who had so thoroughly dominated the Billboard charts for years on end. His collapse was a perfect storm of excessive spending colliding with real financial illiteracy. He poured millions into luxury assets that lost most of their value the very instant he bought them, including a fully custom Bugatti and mountains of high-end jewelry, and he made the fatal mistake of buying properties and luxury items entirely on credit, gambling forever that his incredible hit streak would simply never come to an end. So when the industry's sound finally shifted away from auto-tune and his bookings began to slow, the bills all stayed exactly the same, and he was left staring down into a completely empty account. But his eventual comeback is one of the rare, genuine bright spots on this whole list. After falling into a deep depression, T-Pain completely rebuilt his entire relationship with money, then reminded the whole world of his raw, untuned vocal talent by winning The Masked Singer in 2019. His lesson is beautifully simple. It isn't ever really what you earn, it's what you manage to keep. Gary Coleman. The story of Gary Coleman, who died in 2010 at just 42 years old, is perhaps the single most heart-wrenching financial tragedy in all of television history. Standing 4 feet 8 inches tall due to a lifelong kidney condition, Coleman was, for a time, quite simply, the biggest star on the entire planet during the celebrated run of Different Strokes. Between 1978 and 1986, he was earning as much as $100,000 for every single episode, a genuinely unprecedented sum for any child actor in that particular era. By the time the beloved show finally ended, he should, by all rights, have been sitting comfortably atop a trust fund worth many millions. Instead, when he at last reached adulthood, he made the devastating discovery that the vault was very nearly empty. Unlike so many other stars who carelessly squandered their own fortunes, Coleman was instead a victim of pure, systemic exploitation. Back in 1989, he was forced to sue his own parents and his business manager for misappropriating his childhood earnings, and while he did eventually win a $1.28 million judgment in 1993, that victory was terribly bittersweet. Legal fees had already consumed a massive portion of it, and even then, it represented only a small fraction of everything that had quietly disappeared over the years. His misery was then further compounded by his fragile health. 2 separate kidney transplants and daily dialysis produced astronomical medical bills that steadily devoured whatever little remained. By 1999, the former icon was forced to file for bankruptcy, and he was famously photographed working as a shopping mall security guard, simply to make ends meet. The public cruelly mocked his fall, but that mockery only masked the dark reality of child stardom itself. When he died in 2010 after a fall at home, he was still quietly struggling to regain his footing. His life remains a grim monument to exactly why child star protections now exist at all. Sinbad. David Adkins, known to the whole world simply as Sinbad, remains one of the most genuinely resilient figures in all of comedy, but his financial history is a sobering, cautionary tale of just how quietly tax debt can snowball completely out of control. All throughout the 1990s, Sinbad seemed to be absolutely everywhere at once. From his own sitcom, The Sinbad Show, to beloved blockbuster family comedies like First Kid and Jingle All the Way, earning many millions as a clean, high-energy stand-up act and a genuinely reliable leading man. But behind all of the colorful outfits and the constant, easy jokes, a multi-million-dollar disaster was very slowly brewing, with both the California Franchise Tax Board and the IRS. What truly makes his particular struggle so notable is its sheer, grinding persistence. He was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, not just once, but twice. First in 2009, and then again in 2013. In that second filing, he reported genuinely staggering debts of approximately $11 million, with nearly $8 million of that owed directly to the tax authorities alone. Unlike so many others who blew their money on extravagant parties, Sinbad's slow ruin was largely mechanical in nature, a simple, compounding failure to properly manage his tax withholdings, combined with a habit of quietly living just slightly beyond his means in order to support a large extended family and a full professional staff. He famously insisted that he never once splurged on Bentleys, but the sheer overhead of maintaining an entire celebrity infrastructure without any long-term plan proved absolutely fatal to his savings. By the time of his 2013 filing, his assets were valued at a mere $131,000, only a tiny fraction of everything he had earned across the decades. He became a stark example of how ordinary, middle-class Hollywood success, the kind never backed by a billion-dollar franchise, can evaporate the very moment the IRS decides to audit a full decade of earnings. Yet through all of it, his quiet dignity stayed completely intact.